The house on Wyndham Lane wore a quiet sadness. White siding cracked where sun met shadow, dormer windows shielded from prying eyes by tired curtains. Inside, one man lived alone among the silence, a kind of silence so loud it gnawed at the wallpaper and seeped through the air vents. Arthur Malley would not have called himself brave. When his wife Lynn passed away last autumn, cancer stealing her breath and the color from his world, he did not rebel. He did not rage or lash out. He simply retreated into a gentle ritual, carrying her mug of chamomile tea through the empty rooms every morning, as if she might still need it. As spring pressed its face against the gray of winter, Arthur carried a new hope out into the yard. A single cherry blossom sapling from the local nursery, roots wrapped in burlap, slender trunk wobbling in the wind. He pressed his palms to the soil, knees dampening, feeling the rough edge of each root before settling the sapling into a circle of potential. Each scoop of earth that covered the roots felt like an apology and a promise wrapped into one. It was for Lynn. She dreamed of visiting Kyoto's blossom festivals, hoping to stand beneath falling pink petals in some far-off April. Now every morning Arthur watered the tree, whispering memories to it, soft conversations full of remember when, and if only. Neighbors waved sometimes from across the street, but most gave him space. His house was quiet, but this tree made living with the silence a little more bearable. Yet, as petals tipped fat and pink above the grass, a dull white envelope appeared on the stoop. He held it by one corner, eyes tracing the crimson and navy of the HOA logo, Wyndham Estates Homeowners Association. The letter was thin, impersonal, its signature typed beneath a stamp. Arthur unfolded the single sheet, and his throat tightened. Non-compliant landscaping, it read in capital letters. Per community regulations, all new flora must be submitted for approval to maintain the uniform aesthetic of Wyndham Estates. The words rattled in his chest. There was a deadline for removal, threat of daily fines, footnotes referencing bylaw subsections he'd never read or understood. Someone had reported him. He looked at the cherry tree, still too small to offer shade, its blossoms new and trembling. There had been no warning, no conversation, just this letter. He wondered how something so gentle could be an act against the rules. Inside, the kitchen clock sounded thunderous. Arthur placed the letter next to Lynn's tea mug. His hands trembled as he dialed the HOA's number, the digital monotone guiding him through options. Press 2 for complaints. He pressed, but only got a voicemail asking him to state your concern succinctly. Arthur looked out at the sapling. Dust motes floated through the morning light, swirling around boxes that still weren't unpacked from when Lynn was alive. Was planting a flower in someone's memory really something to regulate? He pressed his fingertips against the glass, each pulse of his heart both grief and resistance. In that moment, he couldn't have guessed how deep this fight would go, or that the letter in his shaking hand was just the first echo of a battle no one in the neighborhood had seen coming. A new envelope would be arriving soon, but this one already smelled of trouble. And trouble in Wyndham Estates never traveled alone. Sleep clung to Arthur that night like wet wool, too heavy to peel away, too thin to warm him. He lay awake, the ceiling lost in shadow, counting the seconds between the clicks of the furnace. Outside, wind bullied through the hedges, rattling window frames. The sapling in the front yard stood defiant against the cold, petals fluttering in a dance even he couldn't join. He reached for Lynn's mug on the nightstand, fingers wrapping around chipped ceramic. Her name, written in the looping script she used for birthday cards, felt rough beneath his thumb. He wondered if she'd have laughed at the idea of non-compliant landscaping, if her stubborn smile would have made this less intimidating. But none of that mattered now. Morning brought another envelope, thicker and more official. Arthur opened the door, breath frosting in the early chill, and stared at the letter from the HOA. This time the language was sharper. Failure to comply will result in a $50 fine per day, commencing immediately. Further action may include legal proceedings. No name, just a rubber-stamped Wyndham Board of Directors. The cherry sapling, innocent and impossibly fragile, stood about 2 feet from the curb. The grass was patchy beneath it. Arthur knelt, feeling the soft mud give beneath his knees. He pressed back the dirt around its roots, checking for any sign of disturbance. There was none, except for the ugly new presence of a yard stake, its plastic face shiny with fresh marker. Reported violation, unauthorized tree. Neighbor kids biked past, their wheels humming over the pavement, but no one looked over. Arthur felt more invisible than ever, his entire life reduced to a file in a cabinet somewhere in the HOA's office. He weighed the options, none of them gentle. Remove the tree, pay the fines, request a hearing and risk neighbors' anger. The memory of Lynn's voice, it was so easy for her to calm people, so impossible for him to find the words she once possessed, sat heavy on his chest. He shuffled back inside, opening drawers for the HOA's contact sheet. A president named Roger Luntz, a list of committee chairs, a tangle of emails without faces. He wrote a note, awkward, his handwriting shaky. Request for exception, planted in my wife's memory. Please reconsider. He stood by the mailbox, hesitating. The sun struggled behind June clouds. Was there more to this than rules? Why was there no space for something beautiful? Before he slid the envelope inside, Arthur glanced at the sapling, imagining Lynn standing beside him, her hand in his. The quiet was heavier now. He sent the letter and waited, wondering if compassion was something anyone still recognized behind the HOA's doors. But waiting, it turned out, would come at a cost. That night, as Arthur tried to fall asleep again, a car idled quietly outside, lights off, engine purring. Was someone watching, or was loneliness playing tricks again? He wouldn't sleep easy, not after what the mail would bring next. Wednesday nights in Wyndham Estates meant folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, and rows of neighbors pretending not to stare too long at each other. The HOA's meeting room smelled of dust and floor polish. Arthur counted the light bulbs, one still flickering in the far corner, and shifted his weight in the hard plastic chair. By the wall, a bulletin board crowed about the annual bake sale and approved siding colors. Arthur's chest tightened. He clutched the letter in his breast pocket, the one he'd written days before, creased from too much folding and unfolding. At the front, President Roger Luntz cleared his throat. He was a large man with a red tie and the permanent expression of someone who considered empathy a weakness. Arthur listened as landscapers were discussed, garbage schedules debated, a fence complaint acknowledged. Finally, Roger glanced at the agenda. Next item, new tree, non-compliance, he said. Arthur Malley, correct. Arthur's hands shook as he stood. He saw neighbors glance at one another, one woman's lips pressed tight in something approaching apology. He read his note, halting but clear. He spoke about Lynn, about loss, about what the tree meant. His words were quiet things, fragile as the blossoms outside. The silence afterward felt like a verdict. Roger barely concealed his impatience. Regulations require uniformity, Mr. Mall. Imagine if everyone planted memorial trees. What would that do to property values? But it's a cherry blossom, Arthur whispered. It's not. We understand grief, Roger cut in, voice sharp, but the board has to act in the interests of all homeowners. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Arthur saw little sympathy in the room, only resignation. He tried to meet a pair of eyes, anyone's, but every gaze slid away. Was all of this really about a tree? Roger's gavel tapped the file before him. A vote. All hands but one rose, including Roger's. Fine to remain, removal required. Decision made without pause. Arthur tried to swallow. No appeal, no discussion. Only another letter coming his way. Outside, the air bit colder than before. The sapling, illuminated by a weak porch light, stood with its blossoms outstretched, a living memory facing exile. But as Arthur fumbled for his keys, he noticed something that didn't fit. A dark shape lingering by the HOA office window, motionless. Was someone watching him, or simply another neighbor hiding secrets of their own? His questions would only multiply before morning. A week passed. The mailbox became a battleground, each trip bringing new threats in crisp window envelopes. The fines piled up like snowdrifts, small at first but relentless, $50 becoming $250, then $350. Each notice bled through Arthur's bank balance like a slow wound. He tried to reason it away. Maybe Roger was right, maybe rules mattered. But every day the thought nagged. Why this tree? Why now, when others on the street grew wild or leaned into power lines with no consequence? One night, between restless dreams, Arthur thought he heard footsteps in the yard. Branches snapped, a small, sharp sound beneath the bedroom window. He shot up, heart stuttering, but the darkness revealed nothing except the vague outline of the sapling's branches against the moonlight. Dawn brought no peace. Arthur visited the HOA office, clutching months of correspondence and his checkbook. The receptionist never looked at him. She slid a pale green form across the desk, a payment slip. When Arthur tried to speak, she only pointed at a brass plaque. All disputes must be submitted in writing, no exceptions. Desperation cut fierce as wind. That evening, as the next fine letter came, Arthur sat by the cherry blossom with a camp chair and a thermos. He dared anyone to ask him to move it. The streetlights flickered, cars rolled past, and somewhere inside his chest, defiance sprouted, tiny and stubborn. A neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, stopped on her walk. She peered at the sapling, the stack of fines in Arthur's lap, and shook her head. "My grandson planted that rose bush for me 2 years ago, never had an issue." Arthur studied her garden, riotous, beautiful, anything but uniform. The realization hit. The rules didn't apply to everyone. He stared up at the dark window of his own living room. How many other trees, bushes, and flowers slipped by the HOA's gaze? Why was his grief alone forbidden to bloom? Inside, the cherry blossom's petals trembled in the breeze, light catching the first hints of pink. Arthur thought again of the shadow by the office window. What had they been searching for? Was someone else caught in their own web? For the first time, the urge to fight outweighed the urge to comply. Arthur resolved to dry his tears, reread every line of the bylaws, and search for the why behind the no. The fines would keep coming, but in the morning, Arthur planned to knock on doors and gather stories. He had no idea what secrets those stories would reveal. Arthur's first knock was tentative, more apology than announcement. At the Hendersons' door, he offered a nervous smile and a stumbling explanation. "I, just wanted to ask about your red maple. Did you have to get permission from the HOA?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated. She peered over Arthur's shoulder at his yard. Her gaze lingered on the cherry blossom, then flicked nervously to the street. We asked years ago, but never heard back, so we just planted it," she whispered. Behind her, a grandfather clock ticked. "They only argue about what they want," she added, voice softer now. Arthur thanked her and moved next door. Each conversation echoed the same hollow notes, neighbors unsure of the rules, some ignored, others punished. Mr. Liu, 2 doors down, confessed he built his front walkway without a permit, yet never heard a complaint. A pattern emerged. Fines fell only on a few, for others, silence. The supposed neutrality of the HOA was a brittle mask, flaking away the more Arthur asked. Why were some targeted while others weren't even noticed? As he continued down the row of houses, the wind carried snippets of conversation and the exhaust fumes of a delivery truck. Unease grew with every answer. Later, Arthur sat on his stoop as dusk wrapped the street in lavender. He scribbled names and infractions in a notebook. Maple, no permit walkway, no complaint, rosebush approved. His cherry blossom was the only one drawing punishment. A movement caught Arthur's eye. Across the street in the dimming light, Roger Luntz stepped from his SUV with a neighbor. They shook hands, talking in low voices, pausing to gesture at the neighbor's new stone path. 6 months old, never approved. Why did rules apply so sharply to Arthur but bend like willow branches for others? Inside, the fines on his table seemed heavier now. There was a current beneath the surface, favoritism, maybe worse. Arthur stared at the cherry tree through his window, the dying light turning blossoms into tiny lanterns. He didn't know yet what the truth looked like, but every answer led to a darker question, one that swirled in the pit of his stomach. What was the HOA president really hiding? Arthur's notebook would be fuller by sunrise, and by then the next clue would already be in his hands. The next morning, Arthur rose before the neighborhood woke. He tucked his notebook into his jacket and inhaled the faint scent of dew and cherry blossoms. The street glistened from last night's drizzle, water pooling in the cracks between the sidewalks. Arthur began his circuit once more, pausing at each property. He snapped discreet photos of unapproved additions, a brick mailbox on Greenway, a trellis tangled with wisteria that appeared overnight, a triple-wide driveway with pavers never matching original specs. With each photo, a knot inside him loosened, but only a little. It struck him how so many violations went untouched. Some homes even flaunted their rule-breaking, giant sunflowers beside the mailbox, non-standard fences arching between lots. If maintaining uniformity was the goal, Wyndham Estates was failing spectacularly. His last stop was Roger Luntz's house. It was larger than most, sprawling under a premature spring sun. On the side of the garage, scaffolding leaned against unfinished siding. Fresh paint dripped onto a canvas tarp. Arthur quietly took a photo, careful not to be seen. A sudden voice startled him. "You looking for something?" Arthur spun around, heart thumping. Roger's wife, Patricia, stood in the driveway, towel thrown over her shoulder, suspicion narrowing her gaze. "Just admiring the work," Arthur bluffed. Patricia didn't look convinced. "We've filed all the right paperwork. That's the rule here, you know." Arthur nodded, retreating, but the encounter stuck with him. If every remodel had to be approved, where was the paper trail? Did privilege grant immunity, or was something deeper happening? Back at home, Arthur combed through the HOA's online portal, clicking through darkly scanned minutes and blurry PDFs. Meeting logs mentioned special exceptions, but names were scrubbed out. Past news from the neighborhood often lauded Roger for preserving standards, but those standards seemed to change whenever it suited him. A neighbor texted him discreetly. "Check which jobs get permits from City Hall, you'll see." Arthur barely paused for lunch, heart racing as he realized. The list of bored friends lined up neatly with the leniency. But there was no proof, only the beginnings of a pattern. Twilight dimmed the edges of the street. Somewhere, a car door slammed. Arthur pressed his hand flat against his notebook, making a silent promise. "I won't let this lie." But exposing truth in Wyndham Estates would require more than photos and whispers. The evidence he needed waited just out of reach, until a discarded receipt changed everything. Rain lashed the pavement in brittle sheets the night Arthur found what he'd been searching for. He returned home late, shoes soggy, hope fraying at the edges after a fruitless evening reviewing HOA meeting videos and scrolling through online archives. His mailbox held only the usual mix of final warnings and community flyers. But taped clumsily to his door, soaked and curling outward, was an envelope marked "For you." No return address. Inside, Arthur found a stack of crumpled receipts, each stamped with local hardware store logos. Scribbled in the margins were addresses that matched homes on his street belonging to the Luntz family's friends and, in 2 cases, board members themselves. Some receipts listed expensive stone patio kits, vinyl fencing, and massive orders of custom paint. Dates matched the months when those houses had undergone obvious, permitless changes. Some receipts were even charged to what looked like an HOA debit card number. A shiver ran through Arthur's spine. His hands trembled as he sorted the slips into piles, one for each property. Mixed among them, one scrap caught his eye, a crude invoice from Roger's Home Services, with Roger Luntz's signature photocopied across the bottom. The evidence was both damning and confusing. How many jobs had been winked through by the same hands that fined Arthur for a single flower tree? Why would Roger risk forging paper trails that common sense alone might unravel? Arthur stared into the near darkness of his kitchen, trying to patch together the story. Patterns emerged. Improvements for insiders, unchecked costs, HOA money spent like a private fund. And who had given him these receipts? The delivery, anonymous and bold, left a trail of its own. Was another board member tired of the favoritism, or was a neighbor quietly watching, hopeful for change? Arthur's mind churned. He could no longer deny what was happening, but he was still only a voice, soft, grieving, easily drowned by official letters. His tree still stood as proof of their hostility, but now in his hands he held proof of something far darker. He glanced out the window. The cherry blossom's petals glowed ghostly beneath a streetlight. Would exposing this be enough to tear down the fortress of Wyndham's board, or would the consequences land harder than he was ready for? The night stretched before him, heavy and restless. The receipts were not enough. He needed to be certain, and that meant getting even closer to the fire. The next morning, Arthur's heart hammered as he paced before the HOA office before dawn. The building was small and squat, locked tight, its windows fogged over with condensation. He checked his watch, minutes crawling by. When the cleaning service arrived just after 7, Arthur slipped inside behind them, blending with their cart's rattle and hum. The receptionist's desk was empty. He crossed to the wall of file cabinets, searching for any evidence of remodeling permits, signed exceptions, anything that connected the board to the special job, addresses. Inside a metal drawer labeled Permits External, Arthur found handfuls of neatly filed papers. The earliest folders were thick, full of requests, rejections, approvals. But the most recent ones, covering the last 2 years, were suspiciously thin. Each new project for those on Roger's friend list was stamped approved in the same handwriting, yet missing city signatures. Other homeowners' files were fat with rejection letters, snide margin notes with phrases like "not in keeping with standards." As Arthur snapped phone photos of the most glaring pages, voices approached down the hall. A key scratched at the lock. Arthur ducked behind a filing cabinet, heart wild. Roger's voice, unmistakable, filled the hall. "He's getting bold. If he pushes this, we're going to handle it our way." Another voice, one Arthur didn't recognize, responded, "No one will believe him. He's just a lonely old man obsessed with a tree." Arthur crouched, breath shallow, his camera poised. The two men's shoes passed his hiding spot, stalling only feet away. Roger's shoes pointed toward the office inner door. "If any of those receipts surface, shred them. The board will back me." Arthur fought the urge to gasp aloud. He had come for proof, but stumbled right into a confession. The danger was real now, not just implied in cold letters or sneers at meetings. Arthur crept out as soon as the hallway cleared, his phone heavy with new files and a recording that might finally unravel everything. As he emerged into sunlight, a sense of dread chased him down the sidewalk. Was it enough? Or had he just painted a target on his own back? The next move would take nerves he never knew he had. Arthur's hands shook as he rewatched the video on his phone, thumb hovering over the play button. "He's just a lonely old man." Roger's words echoed over the static, the implication as sharp as a slap. He sat in his living room, the cherry blossom framed perfectly by the window, petals showering the grass. The files and receipts he'd gathered now felt like kindling piled under a match. But every instinct told him the board would bury this if given a chance. He considered going straight to the police or the city's code enforcement office. But would they care about the quiet rot of favoritism and petty theft? Arthur didn't know the rules of this kind of war. That night, as he stepped outside for air, a voice startled him. "Don't let them scare you, Mrs." Garcia, bold in her flop hat, stood by the curb. She told him she'd seen board retaliation before, trash cans dragged into flower beds, anonymous complaints multiplying when questions got too loud. "But if you show everyone, if you're public," she said, meaning clear, "they can't silence you." Arthur mulled her words deep into the night, finding a flicker of courage where the old Arthur would have found only resignation. The neighborhood brewpub, he remembered, had a weekly community hour, a chance to tell his story with others to listen. Arthur drafted a letter for the HOA, copying in every homeowner he could find, attaching the photos and receipts. Then he sent it to the local news tip line, hands sweating as he hit send. He didn't sleep. Each creak of the settling house, each crunch of gravel outside, sounded like trouble on its way. But for the first time since Lynn's funeral, Arthur was no longer ashamed of his grief. The board had made him an outsider. He was ready to speak for every outsider. The next day would not bring peace, but it would bring witnesses. Many, Arthur hoped, with their own stories to tell. What he didn't expect was whose voice would break the silence first. Arthur had never seen his streets so alive. Vans with station logos filled curb space, and the dull blue canopy of the local news tent flapped beside the mailbox. Reporters busied themselves with tripods and microphones, while neighbors, some curious, others tense, clustered in shifting knots across their lawns. Arthur stood at his front door, clutching the folder of evidence. The cherry blossom tree, heavy with pink, seemed to arch protectively behind him. A reporter, Lisa Tran, approached with gentle questions about Lynn, about the tree, about why a grieving man's act of remembrance was targeted while friends of the board broke rule after rule. Arthur's knees trembled, but Lisa's eyes were kind, her recorder patient. "I just wanted to honor my wife," Arthur said, voice raw. "But I found something wrong with how this place is run, and I'm not the only one." Behind them, Mrs. Garcia moved from neighbor to neighbor, encouraging others to speak. The mood shifted, voices rose in strength, no longer hollow apologies but stories of unfair fines, silent approvals, lost applications. Roger Luntz emerged from his house, his usual smug composure slipping. Camera shutters clicked. "This is a private association matter," he blustered, but the press surrounded him, questions sharp. Why so many unreviewed projects for select homeowners? Why single out Mr. Malley's tree? Roger's denials fell flat. More board members stayed inside, phones to ears, blinds drawn. Lisa referenced Arthur's receipts, the approval forms missing signatures, the recorded conversation from the office. "Will you resign, Mr. Luntz?" The street fell silent, the cherry blossom trembling in the wind. Roger did not answer. His silence spoke louder than words. Arthur was scared, but for the first time he also felt seen, his story no longer just his own. News crews weren't leaving, neighbors weren't either. As dusk crept forward and television spots aired all evening, the neighborhood's secrets hung as heavy as the scent of wet grass after rain. But the last image was not of the board, or Roger, or the news vans departing. It was the cherry tree, still standing, for now. That night the email box at HOA headquarters overflowed. The first cracks in the board's defenses had appeared, but Arthur understood corruption rarely vanished quietly. What happened at the emergency meeting would decide everything. The HOA's emergency meeting felt nothing like the staid, controlled affairs of months past. The room at the community center barely held the crowd. Neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, phones held high, the thrilled hush of anticipation cutting through the fluorescent light. Arthur stood at the front with Lisa Tran and 3 other homeowners. The table usually reserved for the board was half empty. Only Roger, pale and sweating, and 2 loyalists showed up. Their lawyer whispered urgent instructions, but the noise drowned out any authority they once held. New evidence was displayed on a projector. The receipts, the approval forms missing city sign-offs, the invoices routed through HOA funds for private use. Lisa summarized the story for everyone, voice professional but edged with outrage. "Selective enforcement, financial mismanagement, and retaliation against those who question," she concluded. A neighbor stood and spoke. "My application for a new porch has been denied for 2 years, but Roger's friend built a whole sunroom in a weekend." Another, "We were fined for bird feeders, but board homes have additions the city never approved." Arthur felt a surge of gratitude for these voices, people rising not just for Lynn's tree, but for every small unfairness. A motion was made to demand the board's immediate resignation and call for new elections. Roger tried one last defense. "Mistakes were made, but—" The crowd drowned him out. One by one, board loyalists slunk out. Paper ballots were passed, and the count was clear. An interim board of volunteers was appointed. Roger, red-faced and speechless, refused to stand down at first. Only the presence of a reporter and the crowd's determined unity rattled him enough to leave in a hail of shouted questions. Arthur did not rejoice. His hands were steady, but the cost of this small victory weighed heavy. He realized, with each handshake and thank you, how close he'd come to abandoning the fight. But one question gnawed at him. Could the bylaws ever be fixed, or would new leaders just fall into old patterns? That night, despite the uncertain future, Arthur returned home and sat beneath the cherry tree. For the first time, the petals seemed to fall just for him. And still the thought lingered. What truly comes next? The following weeks felt like living at the edge of something unfinished. The news coverage drifted away, the vans replaced by cautious optimism and fresh conversations on doorsteps. Arthur was asked to join the interim committee tasked with reviewing Wyndham's ancient, loophole-riddled bylaws. He hesitated. He was built for quiet gardens, not policy debates, but Lynn would have told him that real change needed gentle hands, too. The meeting started small, just Arthur, Mrs. Garcia, Mr. Liu, and 2 others. They pored over every line, rules about aesthetics, fines, approvals, who got to decide what beauty meant in their neighborhood. Neighbors were invited to open forums. For the first time, people argued not for themselves, but for the soul of the community. Arthur spoke about the cherry tree, about grief, memory, and why compassion belonged in rules as much as order did. He confessed his fears, the way silence can choke or anger divide if you let it grow unchecked. Compromises took weeks, sometimes tempers frayed, but slowly a new set of bylaws emerged, clear standards that applied to everyone. A transparent appeals process, a ban on anonymous complaints. Projects now needed both HOA and city approval, and finally the right for a homeowner to honor loved ones with a tree, one tree, without penalty. As ballots went out for ratification, nerves ran raw. Arthur knew the old guard might try to sway votes with whispers of property values dropping or chaos. But neighbors stood together this time, voices louder and steadier than before. On the day votes were counted, the community center was packed, laughter and anxious hope mixing in the late afternoon light. The new bylaws passed by a landslide. Arthur gazed out at the cherry blossom, its petals fluttering like shy applause. The work was not finished. No rule was perfect. But for the first time, the rules felt like they belonged to everyone, living, breathing, a little kinder than before. Yet, as dusk settled, Arthur found himself staring at a new slip of paper tacked to his mailbox. What could possibly come next after victory? Arthur stared at the paper fluttering from his mailbox, heart creeping into his throat. But this time, the letter was different. It wasn't on official letterhead, not stamped with the cold formality of the board. Instead, scrawled in uncertain handwriting, it read, "Thank you for fighting for all of us. When my husband died, I was too afraid to push back. You reminded me that hope grows where we let it." Across the street, Mrs. Garcia smiled and waved. Children chased a soccer ball under the olive glow of streetlights. The cherry blossom scattered its last show of petals, pink confetti in the hush of a calm spring night. Arthur sat beside the tree, knees drawn to his chest, fingers tracing the bark. He thought of Lynn, her laughter, her courage, her certainty that small acts of kindness could carve out spaces for beauty. He didn't feel strong, but perhaps he had become brave in ways she would understand. Neighbors walked past and paused, offering quiet nods or sharing stories. Someone left a hand-painted stone beneath the tree, inscribed, "Memory and Hope." The bylaws, still new and untested, fluttered with every debate, but Arthur felt in his bones that something lasting had shifted. He talked to Lynn, letting the memory of her warmth join the evening's breeze. Maybe he could finally, gently, close that chapter, not with forgetfulness, but with gratitude. When he stood to head inside, he noticed children had tied pink ribbons on the sapling, now a foot taller. Arthur laughed, a sound pulled from somewhere deep. His phone buzzed, an email from a nearby town, asking how Wyndham Estates rebuilt its community spirit. Arthur smiled. Somewhere another cherry tree might soon take root. He looked at the house, no longer mourning, but shimmering with tomorrow's promise. Not all wounds heal, but sometimes new flowers bloom beside them. As night settled across Wyndham Lane, Arthur understood the fight was not over. It just lived on quietly in every neighbor who dared tend to both memory and hope. And sometimes, even in the smallest victories, the next battle whispers just out of sight. If this story moved you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories where justice, courage, and community collide. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment where the little guy stands tall. We'll see you in the next one.